Hi guy, welcome to the AMIGArama podcast. As always, I'm your host Floppy, and in this week's show, on our 90th episode, we are taking a look at Hewson's classic, Zynaps. Now, this has got some mixed reviews online and some very ropey opinions, so I really wanted to come at this fresh, and hopefully you'll agree I've done a good job this week, because this was a fairly interesting game to go back to, just to see what other people's opinions of it would be like. I mean, I'm not the greatest of shooter players, so it's always a bit of a wing and a prayer when I take one on. Now, this week's news is going to be a bit of a YouTube special. Got a few items lined up for you guys. Again, these are all videos. The first is something that caught my attention from the nostalgia nerd. This was titled The Mystery Amiga Console, which straight away should get your eyes spinning in the heads. He went on a trip with Octavius, I believe, to dig through someone's garage and see what they had. They managed to find in there, well, something to excite any Amiga collector, and it certainly caught my eye, so try not to spoil it for yourself and skip through any part of it. It's well worth your time, I promise. Go and give it a watch. There will be video links in the show notes, so go and check them out and let me know what you think. Now, next up, I've been a big fan of Modern Vintage Gamer for, well, several years now, and he always posts some really amazing stuff, especially Amiga related things. This week I managed to watch his 15-minute showcase on the Amiga's Dungeon Master, and the story behind it, well, it's anti-piracy method, and it didn't just affect like the Amiga, it also affected the ST. It probably sounds a bit dry, but there's a fascinating look there at what the company did to stop the game being copied, and there's a decent tale about how it fooled the pirates for at least a good 12 months. It's amazing when you think that cracking was usually done in days, if not just a couple of hours, so go and check it out, it's well worth your time, I promise. Finally, at least for YouTube videos, we've got another one here by one of our Patreons, 10-Minute Amiga Retrocast. I'm not sure how long he must have spent preparing this episode, but he recently posted a 40-minute beginner's guide to Amiga's Workbench. I watched it all the way through, and there was stuff in there that even I had no clue about, and I've been using mine for a couple of years now on a regular basis. If you're just starting out with Amiga hardware, then this is the first place you should look. It's much better than spending hours trawling through all sorts of random forums for tidbits here and there, when most of it's now in one place on this video. I'm all for videos that stop me from pestering people on Twitter for technical information, so if you've got 40 minutes spare, then go and give this one a watch. Even though I did say it was all going to be about video links this week, I've just remembered off the top of my head, but I've recently read through something called the A to Z of Commodore Amiga games. Now, it's going to be over multiple volumes. I think there's about 10 lined up, I'm not 100% sure. Anyway, it's been done by Kieren Hawken. That's the writer over at Retro Gamer magazines. He's done all sort of history articles and general gaming stuff. He tends to like, well, Atari, ST and all that gaming stuff, but he covers a wide range of different games and lots of systems. This book seems to be 197 pages long. I'm about half the way through. I have got a copy. Now, it's £1.99 on Amazon, so it'll be over in the US as well. I'll stick a link to the Amazon in the show notes. I think it's worth reading. At the very least, it's always great when we get something new and Amiga related, so it managed to keep me entertained for a couple of hours, so I'm sure it's well worth a download. And that's about all the news we have time for this week. Without further ado, let's move over to what I'm sure we're all here for, Zynaps. it seems I've been spending an awful lot of time trawling through Hewson's back catalogue, and the more I play, the more I realise just how big and diverse all of their stuff actually is. When Zynaps popped up on the list of things to cover, I thought we were going to end up with something similar to Cybernoid the Fighting Machine, but every release of Hewson's I've come across always seems to be different to the last. I think that's got to be a good sign for a publisher. It means they're more than willing to invest in different type of games, and there's a good chance that they might have more hits than misses. Well, at least in theory, but Hewson really didn't last as long as you might have hoped, at least into the Amiga's lifespan. Which is why we're going to give them another chance today. Now obviously, Zynaps was published by Hewson. They worked on the Cybernoid games, Exelon, which we covered a few weeks back, Nebulous, Paradroid 90, Stormlord, amongst a few others. The developer behind it was Microwish, who also worked on 5th Gear, the whole Football Manager series, I think there's a hell of a lot of them on the Amiga, Hyperdome, Ikari Warriors as well, amongst a few others. Now this came out in 1988 on just one floppy disk. It did turn out that it was a 2-player game and priced at £24.99. Now coding wise, it was done by Howard Ball and Neil Metcalf. Both between them worked on 5th Gear, one of the Football Managers, it might be the first one, Ikari Warriors and Victory Road. Graphics wise, Pete Lyon, he did Alien Breed 3D, very impressive, Battleships, Fright Night, Tanglewood, oh Tanglewood, that's not that Mega Drive game is it? No, Worms as well, etc etc. Starting to think we might be in for something special here. Music wise, it was done by Gulo Zici, who worked on The Crystal and Obitus. I'm not even sure what that is, I should have looked them up. Having a look into the Amiga port, it seems that code from the Atari ST version was ported directly across onto the Amiga itself with just a few tweaks to the sound and hardware just to make it all run. So in fact what we've got is the same game running on a different system. Now the original 8-bit designers of the game had long since left Hewson by the time that the Amiga port came out, so there isn't really any info about it. That doesn't mean though that we can't dig deeper into its history, as there's always the 8-bit story to cover. Zynaps started out with John Cummings and Dominic Robinson, both being given a free rein to come up with a fresh 8-bit shooter. The primary development machine was the ZX Spectrum, but the Amstrad and C64 versions that came out were made at roughly the same time, all sharing parts of the concept and initial design. I wonder if that included code as well. Why am I saying that? I should have found out. Apologies there guys, I missed that one whilst I was looking it up. Looking through my notes, John Cummings devoted all of his time to the C64 port, with Dominic designing all of the levels over on the ZX Spectrum. Zynaps was in production for a grand total of 6 months, and Dominic wanted to do something that was an improvement over the likes of Iridium, and finally settled on creating a game more in line with one of Hewson's other shooters, Nemesis, as well as trying to tie it all in with many different shooter ideas he'd managed to meet up and see in the arcades. This meant that there were a lot of trips made to a local London arcade for inspiration, and there was definitely a very strong push to at least match the feel of how Nemesis played. I did try and look up to see if there was any Amiga port, but from what I could see, it just never made it to the 16-bit systems. It was at this time that Stephen Crow was brought onto the team in order to do the graphics, and Dominic set about building a graphics engine for the scrolling and sprites. Stephen used his own graphics editor in order to get all the designs together with suggestions from the other team members, and they all spent a great deal of time converting them over to pixels and reconstructing them into something the game could actually use. When it came to sprite designs, the three worked together to come up with the best ideas, and Richard Dawkins' book, The Blind Watchmaker, provided a lot of rough concepts for genetic mutations that they could all use to see and fit into the game. When it came to the controls, Dominic spent a great deal of time tweaking, playtesting, and trying his best to make it seem more like an arcade game. though I guess it's up to the player whether he achieved this or not. Most of the production went through without issue, though he does recall having to use Sinclair microdrives to save all of the development data, which I think were on the Sinclair QL computer. That was a failed mid-80s system for sure. But the disk drives in them are cheap bits of plastic. They're notorious for failing and they seem to fall apart at the blink of an eye. Yet they were the best and quickest tech on hand for him to use, and it would have made the whole development last even longer if it wasn't for having them to hand. On its launch, Zynaps was met with critical praise, and Dominic seemed really pleased with the overall response. I mean, it was the first time he'd ever made a full game all on his own, especially from scratch. Looking back at it though, he was certain that it was a product of its time, and he's sure that it has stood up well today. Ports wise, this came out on the Amstrad CPC 464, Atari's STE obviously because it came from there, Commodore 64 and the good old ZX Spectrum. Zynaps is a shoot 'em up set in an alien infested planetary system. The game begins with our hero escaping in a Scorpion fighter from an alien space station out into deep space. Battle continues through asteroid storms to a nearby planet, from where, equipped with weaponry and hyperspace units taken from destroyed alien craft, he sets out in search of the secret alien stronghold. After many terrifying battles fought throughout the solar system, our hero discovers the location of the alien base and the final conflict can begin. Another short story that's straight to the point. They really didn't want to bring you into the game and get you all excited for this one. The opening section of Zynaps would seem to have everything you should want from a shooter. The bottom quarter is attractive enough that it doesn't get in the way during gameplay, and it shows the Zynaps logo, live score, which player you are, weapon activation node and the current weapons on screen. There's even a few blinking dials in there just to make it look like that perfect science fiction ship. Your Scorpion attack fighter is shaped more like a fork on close inspection, but one that can spin slightly as you fly around. The main ship sprite is quite large with some tight corridors to fly down, so you will need to spend an awful lot of the first level learning just how to maneuver the ship. The fighter's movement isn't like anything else that I've ever played with before, and you will need an awful lot of time just to get used to it, especially if you want to progress. The joystick can move in all 8 directions, and pressing fire will use your main pulse laser. Holding it down will use the fuel scoop, or if you collected one, the secondary weapon. Some will need you to release the button after holding it in order to use, but mostly you're going to be banging away on that fire button just to use your laser weapon, hoping for the best. There are various weapon systems to be collected on screen. These include pulse lasers, plasma bombs, homing and seeker missiles, the latter being the highest possible secondary weapon. That one tracks and hunts down the foes that it manages to lock onto. The fighter is also equipped with a fuel scoop that's always on screen, but all it does is activate this secondary weapon, or one of the abilities that you can manage to pick up around the levels. Those often consist of more speed, stronger lasers, speed, or missile targeting. Using some of these will make the whole screen flash white, so it's a bit of an odd effect that they've decided to go with, as I found it can be a tad bit distracting. There are around 14 levels that loop, and if you manage to reach the end of the game it all starts from scratch, so in a way it gives the player a lot of replayability, well at least in theory. Earning 10,000 points will net you an extra life, and there's one for every 20,000 points after that. Most of what's on offer is your typical shooter fare. You only begin with 3 lives and there's no continues, so taking out as many enemies as possible should be your main concern. I will say that the stage design for each and every section of this comes across as some epic fast-paced shooter. There's a lot of different variety between each of the levels, even though it's all based in space, and it's really nice to see a good range of colours, from things like asteroids to bioorganisms and all sorts of those sci-fi elements. The universe it offers in the levels is definitely more than the player should expect, with each of the levels offering a fresh take and a different viewpoint. Hewson have done a really good job in enemy designs, and every level has different aliens, even if they all fire identical weapons. Each stage has a single screen boss that's fast, challenging and can be hard to outmaneuver. You won't be killing these in a hurry. The bullets on screen do pulse and spin, which can be quite nice to look at, but often it's really hard to miss being hit by them, as you need to spend an awful lot of time focusing on not hitting any of the surroundings. You will find that every single thing on screen will cause you to explode, and many fly about at a silly speed. I think even veteran space shooter fans might have a hard time with this one. As a shooter, it certainly doesn't pull its punches. The opening music for this isn't going to have anyone bopping their head along, but it is a good sci-fi beat, and it put me in the mind of Konami's Gradius games. I guess it gets the job done. You might think that that's all there is to it, yet the odd thing about Zynaps is throughout all of the stages, there's this low hum from the back of the starship. It put me in mind of something like Star Trek, where they have the engine noise that's always on in the background. Mixed in with that are a few typical blips and bops, with a few explosions thrown in as well. You know, the sort of stuff that's suited to a shooter. Coming away from it, I thought they'd done a really good job with the audio overall. It was a pretty good audio range. I was quite pleased with it. That probably sounds just about straightforward, though I do think we need to take a moment to look into some of the game's problems. The biggest gripe I had against Zynaps is that it has to be the size of the ship. The top half of the screen shows a really thin play area, but your vessel is really oversized. As I said, it's like a fort. It twists and it turns as you move up and down, which looks graceful if you like, especially with those fancy turns, yet the collision detection is where it all falls down, because it means it's just way too easy to clip stuff and explode. I found that a lot of the enemy shots were just too big, and with the general speed that you have, you just aren't quick enough to avoid them on the most part. The basic game is just too slow right from the off, and I understand that they want to give you a chance to upgrade the ship, make it faster, that sort of thing. But once you have the speed up collectible, it doesn't exactly hit max speed. You're going to be spending an awful lot of time as that original start out ship, and that's mostly because of the difficulty and how easy it is to keep getting blown up. So it needs to be fairly manoeuvrable right from the off, just to be fair, and it really doesn't manage to do it. A good example of the difficulty is just how quickly the bosses move around the screen. They fire big spinning shots that are much faster than you, plus they tend to move in erratic patterns around the screen, many times quicker than you could ever possibly get up to. It's not fun when it can feel like you're just flying through treacle. It's strange to see the enemies move so quickly, because in theory that means you should be able to move at that speed as well, but you just never get the chance to even get up to those higher levels. And that's it, those are the biggest problems, the speed and the difficulty. It really does not do itself any favours. Looking over at the magazine scores, Generation gave it 90%, Commodore User 8 out of 10, Zap 78%, and the lowest of the lot is Amiga Computing at 66%. For me, I have to say that Zynaps is well deserving of that 66% rating. When I first did my prep work for the show and looked into the game, I was hoping for more of an R-type clone, you know, rather than a slow Gradius type one. From the pictures and videos that I saw of it online, it did appear to have something going for it, but once I managed to sit down with it and play it through properly, that all just vanished and disappeared. I've come to realise that Hewson has a thing for really difficult games. It seems to be a big part of everything that they've released. But for a shooter, it needs to be fair at the same time, you know, it really needs to feel that way. I'd rather blame myself for being shot rather than the game itself, but when it doesn't even give you the basic speed to get through the levels, it just becomes far too restrictive. It's all very well having nice fancy graphics with a ship that soars through the air, but when you have levels that make you feel like a sardine in a sandwich, it's just doing something really wrong. I love my shooters and I'm not the best at them for sure, and I think with a few hours play I could get quite far through Zynaps, but the rest of it, even just for a simple shooter, just left me cold. I'm really in two minds about the audio. The theme music was good enough that I'd like to hear more from the composer, yet there's nothing else beyond that but the sound effects. With the constant engine hum that they've used, I'm guessing that must have taken up a whole audio channel from the Amiga, and I'm thinking that they must have consciously decided not to have a range of different music tracks. It just left me feeling a little bit disappointed because we'd had some other good stuff right at the beginning. A lot of Zynaps feels like an almost there, and the lack of shoot 'em up tunes, it just really doesn't help. In its defense, to say this came out in 1988 though, it really does sound good enough with those sound effects, especially for the early Amiga days. And that audio hum, despite getting in the way, is really probably its best feature. The presentation of the game as a whole is really nice. The enemy shapes and star fields work brilliantly when compared to decent shooters of this ilk. Yet, this feels like one of those games that needs more tweaking around the edges. A thinner ship for one and faster, tighter controls. It's almost as if the balance is off throughout the entire game. I've really tried my best to find the fun in this one, but there was just very little to be had. No real push to drive you on through all the levels. It can loop all it wants, but if there's no real reason to drive you to keep going through the stages, why would you even ever bother? None of this makes the game particularly bad in any real way at all. You're not going to go far wrong in at least giving it a spin, but with such a big games library on the Amiga, it just does nothing to stand out from the crowd. Maybe it's just me, but I'm starting to see a pattern with some of these early Hewson games. They never seem to be quite as good when compared to the earlier 8-bit versions. The Specky one has speed and playability on its side, whilst the Amiga game just isn't even in the same league. Competent but bland is not a feeling you should be taken away from the game. And sorry to end on a down note, but that's all Zynaps left me feeling. Well, it's about time to close this week's show. If you'd like to comment on anything I've said today, or even just want to get in touch in general and have a quick natter with me, or possibly come up with suggestions, you can do so over on lefarius@amigarama.com. You can go to the Facebook page, which is facebook.com/AmigaRama, or even follow me on Twitter, which is @AmigaRamaPod. I do check that an awful lot and I will respond, so drop me a line. If you'd like to help out the show, you can do me a favour and drop us a review over on iTunes or become one of our amazing Patreon supporters. That list is getting ever bigger by the week. As always, we need to send out a big thank you, and this week's Patreons are 10 Minute Amiga Retrocast, Adam Bradley, Darren Coles, Gary Heather, who just joined us a couple of weeks ago now, Graham Vebke, Glenn Milford from Casual Retro Gamer Weekly, Jan Holbo Rasmussen, yes, that's another new victim, Jason Warnes, Laurent Giraud, O'Brien's Retro and Vintage, Pistol, Kremsky, Wentin Barnes, Retro Ravi, Richard Legg, Richard Pearson, Sneff, Steve Engeldo, and finally, Treble. Thanks for listening, and until next time, guys.